There is a version of you that disappears the moment you want someone too much. You already know this about yourself. You have watched it happen, more than once, felt your own voice change, your own posture soften, your own standards quietly renegotiate themselves in real time, and you called it love, or chemistry, or simply being open, when it was actually something much older and much more dangerous. It was the exact moment you handed another person the authority to decide how you feel about yourself. I am not going to tell you her name. You already supplied one the instant I started this sentence, without meaning to, the way a body flinches before the mind agrees to. That is not a coincidence. That is the entire subject of tonight, and by the end of this you are going to understand exactly why that name arrived so fast, and exactly what it cost you the last time you let it run your decisions. Here is what I actually want to know before you decide whether to keep listening. What would it cost you to admit, honestly, tonight, that the calm, secure version of yourself you present at the start of almost anything has never once survived contact with real wanting? That the moment desire enters the room, an entirely different operating system takes over, one built years before you had any say in the matter, and you have been calling its decisions your own ever since. Most men will not make it through the next few minutes honestly, because admitting this means admitting that the coolest, most composed version of themselves was never actually tested by anything that mattered to them yet. Think about the specific evidence you already have of this, if you are willing to look at it plainly instead of explaining it away the way you always have. The version of you that exists before you actually want someone can be patient, measured, entirely rational about what he deserves and what he will and will not tolerate. The moment real desire shows up, that man is nowhere to be found, replaced by someone who checks a phone 40 times in an hour, who reads meaning into a delayed reply that a stranger would recognize immediately as nothing, who abandons standards he would have sworn, a week earlier, were non-negotiable. You have watched this happen to yourself enough times to know it is not a coincidence. It is a pattern, and patterns have a source, and the source has never once been examined honestly, not by you, not until tonight. Detachment is the most misunderstood word in the entire discipline you are about to hear, so let's remove the confusion immediately, before it costs you the rest of this. Detachment does not mean not caring. It does not mean coldness, or performing indifference, or pretending a woman's presence or absence means nothing to you while secretly checking your phone every 4 minutes. That is not detachment. That is attachment wearing a costume, and it fools nobody, least of all the person you're trying to fool it in front of. Real detachment is something far more specific, and far more dangerous to the version of you that currently exists. It is the state of wanting something completely, with your full attention and full desire, while remaining entirely intact if you do not get it. Not intact because you didn't care. Intact because your sense of yourself was never actually stored inside the outcome to begin with. Epictetus drew the sharpest line in the history of this subject, and almost nobody who quotes him has actually understood what he was asking of a man. Some things are within our power, and some things are not. Our opinions, our desires, our own actions are within our power. Other people, their opinions of us, their choices, whether they stay or go, whether they text back, whether they choose us at all, none of that has ever been within our power, not for one single second, no matter how much of your identity you have secretly staked on the outcome. Notice exactly where you have been keeping your sense of worth this entire time. Not in your own conduct, your own effort, your own integrity, the actual things that were always yours to control. In her response. In whether she chose you. In a decision that belonged entirely to another human being with her own history, her own fears, her own reasons that have almost nothing to do with your value as a man, and you have been letting that external, uncontrollable verdict decide how you feel about yourself for years, checking it constantly, the way a man checks a wound to see if it's healing, except every check reopens it. This is the part that should genuinely disturb you tonight. The specific anxiety you feel waiting for a reply, the specific hollowness that arrives when someone pulls away, the specific desperation that makes you say the wrong thing at exactly the moment composure would have served you best, none of that is love. It is withdrawal. Your nervous system has quietly wired her presence to your own sense of safety, the same circuitry a man develops around anything he has learned to need in order to feel whole, and you have been mistaking the intensity of that withdrawal for the depth of your feelings, when it is actually just dependency, dressed up in more romantic language. Consider how identical this actually feels, physiologically, to any other form of withdrawal a man might recognize more easily in a different context. The restlessness. The inability to concentrate on anything else. The bargaining with yourself about whether one more check of the phone counts as breaking the discipline you promised yourself you'd hold. If a friend described these exact symptoms to you about something other than a woman, you would recognize the pattern immediately and call it what it is. The only reason you have never called it that here is because this particular dependency has been culturally rebranded as romance, celebrated in every song and film you have ever consumed, until wanting someone this desperately started to feel like proof of how deeply you loved, rather than proof of how little internal ground you were actually standing on. Marcus Aurelius wrote, privately, to no audience but himself, that he had power over his mind, not outside events, and that realizing this would give him strength. He was not writing about romance when he wrote it, but the mechanism is identical. The strength was never going to come from controlling her decision. It was always going to come from finally locating his own mind as the only territory he actually governed, and building his entire sense of self on that territory instead of on ground that was never his to stand on. Think about how much of your energy, across your entire dating life, has been spent trying to manage an outcome that was never yours to manage. The careful texts, timed and reworded a dozen times before sending. The performance of not caring, executed so precisely that it became its own form of desperate caring. The mental replaying of a single interaction from 40 different angles, searching for the missed sign, the wrong word, the exact moment it started slipping away. All of that energy, spent on territory that was never yours, while the only territory that was ever actually yours, your own conduct, your own standards, your own peace, sat neglected the entire time. Here is the harder question underneath that one. If you knew, with total certainty, that a specific woman was never going to choose you, would your own sense of yourself survive that information intact? Sit with your honest answer, because it tells you exactly how much of your identity you have quietly outsourced to a verdict that was never yours to control, and it tells you exactly how much work is actually required before you can call yourself a detached man instead of simply a man who has learned to hide his dependency more skillfully than most. Seneca wrote to a friend grieving a loss that no external thing was ever truly ours, only lent to us for a time we do not get to choose, and that the wise man holds what is lent loosely, grateful for its presence, unshattered by its departure, because he never mistook the loan for a possession in the first place. This applies with brutal precision to desire. She was never yours to keep in the way your fear insists she was. Wanting her fully and holding her loosely are not opposites. They are the only combination that has ever actually worked, in the entire history of men who learned this the hard way. Notice what happens in your chest right now if you actually imagine holding something you want without gripping it. Not performing detachment as a strategy, a technique you deploy to seem more attractive, because that version is simply manipulation wearing philosophy's clothing, and it collapses the instant real desire enters the room. I mean actually loosening your grip, tonight, on the specific outcome you have been quietly white-knuckling for longer than you'd like to admit. Something in you resisted that instruction. That resistance is the exact dependency we are talking about, defending itself the way any old pattern defends itself against a correction it was never built to survive. This is where almost every man gets the lesson wrong, so listen carefully to the distinction, because it is the entire difference between becoming genuinely detached and becoming simply cold. Detachment is not about wanting less. Diminishing your own desire to protect yourself from disappointment is not strength. It is a smaller, quieter form of the same fear, simply relabeled as maturity. A man who wants nothing risks nothing, and a man who risks nothing has not actually solved the problem. He has simply retreated from the field entirely and called the retreat wisdom. The actual discipline is harder than either extreme. Want fully. Pursue honestly. Show real interest without editing it down to seem safer. And do all of that while keeping your actual identity, your sense of your own worth, anchored somewhere she can never reach, because it was never supposed to be stored in her hands to begin with. That is not coldness. That is the only form of wanting that has ever actually been sustainable, because it is the only form that does not require another person's cooperation to survive. Think about the specific moments you have felt most attractive to someone, if you are honest about it. It was rarely the moments you were performing certainty you didn't feel. It was the moments your desire was real and your identity was clearly not on the line, the exact combination almost no man is taught how to hold, because he was never shown the difference between confidence and dependency wearing confidence as clothing. Here is what actually happens to a man who has done this work, the real version, not the performed one. He can want a woman completely and still sleep soundly the night she chooses someone else, not because Marcus Aurelius returned, again and again in his private writing, to the same discipline. Ask, of anything you are anxious about losing, whether it was ever truly yours to lose, or whether you were simply granted a temporary, unowned nearness to something valuable, and mistook the nearness for possession. Every woman who has ever mattered to you, whoever will matter to you, falls into this category. Not because she doesn't deserve to be wanted fully. Because wanting her fully and owning her attention were never the same thing, no matter how badly your fear has always insisted they were. Notice how much lighter this actually makes the wanting, once you stop confusing it with owning. You can want someone with your entire attention and still recognize that her choice, her presence, her eventual decision to stay or go, was never a referendum on your value as a man. It was simply her own free will, exercised the way anyone's free will gets exercised, for reasons that belong to her, not to you, and never did. This is the part that most self-improvement content gets wrong when it touches this subject, dressing detachment up as a seduction technique, a way to appear more desirable through calculated indifference. That approach treats the woman as the target and detachment as the weapon. The actual discipline runs in the opposite direction entirely. You are the target. Your own dependency is the thing being dismantled. Any change in how she responds to you afterward is a side effect of your own genuine transformation, not the goal you were chasing when you started doing the work. Epictetus taught that a man's worth cannot be determined by any single external outcome, and this holds true with particular weight here, in the exact area where men most consistently forget it. If your worth were actually contingent on being chosen by every woman you wanted, no man in history would have any worth at all, because every man who has ever lived, including the ones history remembers as the most desired, has been rejected, has wanted someone who did not want him back, has stood exactly where you are standing tonight, and remained exactly as worthy afterward as he was before it happened. Think about the specific woman occupying your mind right now, whether that presence arrived the instant this started or has been sitting there the entire time, unspoken. Ask yourself honestly, does your current peace depend on her choosing you? If the answer is yes, you already have your assignment, and it has nothing to do with her. It has to do with locating your own worth somewhere she was never granted access to in the first place, and building from there instead of from her decision. Seneca wrote that he who wants his fear to end must let his hope end too, that the two are bound together, and cannot be selectively kept. This is precisely why anxious wanting is so exhausting. Every hope you place in her decision arrives bundled with an equal, matching fear, because you cannot hope for an outcome without simultaneously fearing its opposite, and the only way to release the fear is to release the specific hope it was tethered to, not the desire itself, but the desperate, white-knuckled hope that desire would somehow guarantee an outcome it was never entitled to guarantee. This does not mean giving up on wanting her. It means separating the wanting from the demanding, a distinction almost nobody in your life has ever taught you clearly. You are allowed to want. You are allowed to pursue, to show real interest, to hope honestly for a specific outcome. What you are not allowed to do, if you actually want to become the man this discipline is describing, is quietly demand that outcome as a condition of your own peace, because the moment you do, you have handed her, without her ever asking for it, complete control over how you feel about yourself. Notice how this distinction plays out in the actual texture of a real interaction, because it is easy to agree with in principle and nearly impossible to hold in the moment unless you have actually practiced it. Wanting sounds like reaching out because the impulse is honest, and accepting whatever response arrives without spiraling into a private trial over what it means. Demanding sounds like reading a delayed reply as evidence of your own inadequacy, like needing her enthusiasm to match yours exactly, like quietly keeping score of who initiated last and treating the answer as a referendum on how much you matter. The words coming out of your mouth might look identical in both cases. The internal experience is nothing alike, and she can feel the difference even when she cannot name it. Here is what this actually looks like in practice, stripped of the philosophy, reduced to the specific texture of a Tuesday. It looks like reaching out because you want to, not because a rule about timing told you to wait exactly this long to avoid appearing needy. It looks like being honest about your interest instead of performing scarcity as a technique. It looks like feeling real disappointment when it doesn't go the way you hoped, without that disappointment metastasizing into a referendum on your entire worth as a man. Disappointment is allowed. Devastation is optional, and devastation is almost always a sign that something besides the actual loss is being triggered, some older, larger wound about worth that this particular woman simply happened to brush against. Marcus Aurelius commanded an empire while grieving children he had buried, one after another, and never once let the grief convince him that his own worth had died alongside them. That is not because he loved them less than you love the woman occupying your mind right now. It is because he had spent years, deliberately, building the discipline of locating his own peace somewhere loss could not reach it, not as coldness, but as the only sustainable way to keep loving fully in a world where nothing external was ever guaranteed to stay. You already know whether you have this discipline or whether you have simply been performing its absence as romance. Notice, honestly, the last time desire entered your life. Did your sense of yourself survive it intact, or did it disappear the moment she did not respond the way you needed her to? That answer is not a verdict on your character. It is simply the starting line, and you are standing on it right now, tonight, with more information about yourself than you had 10 minutes ago. The work ahead of you is not learning to want less. It is learning to want fully while keeping your own worth somewhere no woman, no rejection, no silence on the other end of a phone, has ever had the authority to touch. That is not a technique you perform to become more attractive. It is simply what it means to finally stop handing your identity to people who were never asked to carry it, and never should have been asked to carry it, not by you, not by anyone. If this reached the exact place you've been avoiding tonight, the specific name that arrived uninvited at the start of this, remember what was actually said here before the old dependency has a chance to reassert itself. It always reasserts itself quietly, disguised as love, disguised as depth of feeling, disguised as simply who you are. It is not who you are. It is a pattern, installed a long time ago, and patterns, unlike identities, can be examined, questioned, and finally, deliberately, replaced. Notice the specific relief in that last idea, because it is easy to miss under everything else said tonight. You are not being asked to want less, or to protect yourself by caring less, or to become the version of a man who has simply given up on being touched by another person's presence. You are being asked to want completely, with nothing held back, while finally moving the one thing that was never supposed to be on the table in the first place, your own sense of worth, somewhere permanent, somewhere no outcome can reach it. That is not a smaller way to live. It is the only version of wanting someone that was ever actually built to last. The men whose names get remembered for how they loved were rarely the ones who loved the least fiercely. They were the ones who loved fiercely from solid ground instead of from the shifting, uncertain territory of another person's changing mind. That ground is available to you tonight, the same way it was available to you the entire time you were searching for it somewhere else. There will be a night, sooner than you think, if you actually practice this instead of simply agreeing with it and closing the video, when you will notice her name cross your mind and feel something closer to warmth and panic, interest without emergency, wanting without the old, familiar bracing for loss. That will not mean you have stopped caring. It will mean you have finally located your own worth somewhere she was never granted the authority to reach, and from that ground, wanting someone stops being a risk to your identity and simply becomes what it was always supposed to be. A man, choosing, freely, without needing the choice return to feel whole.